Okay, so we'll start off. How's it going? And welcome to a very special episode of Geek Eire podcast. And you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Jo Jorgensen, libertarian nominee for President of the United States.
So, this is probably sort of a first, of an anime and internet culture podcast interviewing a presidential candidate. So the first thing is going to be, what made you actually want to run for the presidency in the first place?
Because government is too big, too bossy, too nosy, and it usually hurts the people it tries to help. And I'd like to see us get back to where we can get back to a more peaceful society in which people have control over their own lives.
Did you always have that sort of, initiative to run for, presidency, or was this something that, you gave a little bit of thought about?
Oh, no, actually the opposite, because a lot of people will ask me, well, I guess you must have run for student body president in high school or college or student council, something like that. And my answer is no. I didn't like the idea that there were elite few that could make rules for everybody else. I was a big fan of the book Animal Farm, and that's what I think that our culture has become.
All animals are equal, but some are more equal than others.
Exactly. And that's what I would like to get rid of.
So my first sort of question is, what made you decide to actually be the libertarian candidate?
Because I saw a real need for somebody who is truly a libertarian. We have had, and I actually supported the last nominee, Gary Johnson, who was a former Republican governor. I thought it would give us great press, but I thought it was time for a change and we needed to go back to our roots. And I've been in the movement for 40 years. I was the VP nominee in 1996, and I really enjoyed spreading the word.
Yeah. So one of the things I'm actually quite interested about is one of the questions from one of our listeners is, so the Libertarian Party in general usually only comes up during the election season. Is there a particular reason why they only sort of show up around the sort of election time where they have a little bit of notice, or is there, they're always around, it's just, the media doesn't pay attention to them?
Yeah, well, part of the problem is that when we started gaining popularity, the Democrats and Republicans put in a lot of hurdles for us to get through in order to get on the ballot. And if we can't get on the ballot, then we can't win. Or what happens is we have to spend so much money getting on the ballot that now we don't have a lot of money left over for advertising. So we are having a hard time breaking through that barrier to get into to get elected, so that we are written about. And in fact, what's criminal here is that the United States government has talked about countries around the world and pointed out specific countries with roadblocks, and they have said that these are not free and fair elections, and yet they're doing the very same thing in our country. According to their standards, we're not having free and fair elections.
Yeah, I think that one of the most pressing issues at the moment, and I know you've been quite vocal about this at the moment, what's your situation on the whole situation with, I know it's essentially, the president against the people at this point, where there's this complete divide between, people trying to get sort of civil liberties between, black people and the police.
Well, once again, government has thrown a wrench into things and government caused it. Again, I mentioned that government, they say they want to help people, but there are so many unintended consequences that other people could see and that they go through anyway. For instance, we have seen very fast escalation. Well, one of the reasons we have that escalation is that the federal government has offered paramilitary equipment like grenade launchers and tanks, and as well as other money and free training to help police departments. So now that the police is militarized, now when there's a problem, then it escalates very rapidly.
Yeah. Yeah. So, do you think? Do you have a plan for sort of uniting people at this point, where, because it seems that America is, at a complete, we're divided now at this point.
So a couple of things. First of all, I would stop giving tanks and grenade launchers to local police departments. But what I would do is, part of the reason that there's such a divide is that you get pretty much everything through government now that you didn't get 50, 60, 70 years ago. If you want your kid to get the kind of education you want, you have to get in there and fight government to get what you want. If you want the kind of health care, if there's a certain kind of health care you want, you have to get in there and fight the government. Just go right on down the line. So whereas 60 years ago, we didn't have that. You could vote at a local level. You had control over your schools. You didn't have to go through the federal government. So my plan is to reduce government, specifically the federal government, so that people can make more of their own choices and they don't have to be in such a divide. Right now, if you want the kind of school, let's say you're a Republican and you'd like to see prayer in the school. Well, now you got to fight your Democrat next door who doesn't want prayer in the school. So how about we give the money, the power back to the people and allow them to make their own decisions?
Well, that's a fairly valid opinion. So the next thing is, as far as you mentioned about healthcare. How do you think the U.S. has done compared to preparing for trying to stop the COVID-19 compared to other countries?
Oh, they once again got in the way. So the FDA, as you've always had to have a safety requirement through the FDA where you have to prove your drug is safe. However, since 1962, you have to have an efficacy requirement. So you have to prove that your test or your drug or whatever does what it says or what you say it's going to do. And that sounds like a nice goal, except sometimes it can cost $1 million up to $1 billion just to approve one drug. And also it's a very lengthy process. So we had American companies, over 60 different American companies that were creating test kits, and yet the FDA only approved 2 of them. So the other test kits that the other companies made were going all around the world. So we heard about, for instance, Southeast Asia, how they had heavy testing. Well, yeah, because they were using our test kits that we couldn't buy. So President Trump should have gone in there and through the Emergency Powers Act said, you only have to prove safety. You don't have to prove efficacy. Let's get that testing out there.
Yeah, so as you were, one of the things as well, like I'm an expat along with, I think there's over 30,000 expats worldwide. They're, living abroad in different countries, everywhere from, Guam to China to whatever it is. A lot of them have felt sort of disconnected with the country because you're at a state where, you already pay tax in the country that you're in at the moment. And FACTA is one of the biggest hurdles. Both Democrat and Republican have endorsed the FACTA Act, where you have to pay tax both in America and in the country that you're in. Well, what's your opinion on that stance?
Well, I would work to eliminate the federal income tax my first year in office. So I'm not talking about high taxes versus low taxes. I'm saying zero taxes. What we need is we need to encourage productivity, and we should not be taking part of part of that productivity that people have.
Yeah. So okay. So that actually leads us to our next question. He's actually a content creator himself. Goes by the name of the Anime Trainer. He's a fitness trainer over in America.
Oh.
He does fitness videos,
Mm-hmm.
and he's actually a huge supporter of yourself. And he wants to know your opinion on how would you deal with the IRS in your country, in America.
I would get rid of it, completely eliminate it, dismantle it, get rid of it the first year. Once again, what we have right now is people work hard, they give a significant chunk of their money to the IRS, and then the government takes it and they give it to bureaucrats who end up spending it on special interests, lobbyists, and often things they don't even want. For instance, like these military tanks. If the government didn't have the money for the military tanks, we wouldn't have the escalation. Instead, people would get to keep their money and make their own decisions. They could support local businesses. They could have the kind of education they wanted, and they could have the kind of healthcare they want.
Yeah, so that actually sort of brings us to sort of one of the things I want to sort of bring up is there's a lot of unnecessary laws as far as sort of rezoning when it comes to voting, which both Democrats and Republicans have kind of sort of screwed up as far as, civil liberties type of thing, having voting days on, when you're working, between one job and another job, or having it completely in a different district. So the people that you wanted to vote for, even on a local level, changes because of a zoning restriction. And this affects a lot of civil liberties with Black people, especially in the Midwest. Do you have any plans for those types of laws?
Well, I would do as much as I could with those laws, but the main thing I would do is I would try to get government so small that it didn't matter as much if people voted. As I said, right now, voting is basically an act of self-defense. You have to go and vote to get the kind of life you want. What I would say is let's make government so small that if you missed voting day, you wouldn't even notice it because government wouldn't have such an impact on your life.
Well, that's kind of true. At the moment, Ireland actually doesn't have government in power. So, basically, it was not enough people voted for a particular party between three parties. So they're kind of trying to figure out at the moment.
Yeah, now what do we do?
Oh, well, it's been this way for the last 5 months, and I know the world hasn't come to an end.
Yeah, exactly. And that's funny because whenever there's a government shutdown, we seem to get along just fine.
Yeah. All right. So one of the questions is sort of on a matter of international relations, especially like, I'm an expat, and just, a lot of people are expats abroad, even like students that are studying, a year in a different country. How would you deal with sort of international relations? Because it seems that, I don't want to, be apolitical here, but from my own opinion, it seems that, Trump has kind of screwed up American relations with a lot of different countries.
Oh, yeah. Well, one thing that he's done is gotten into these tariff wars, and a lot of people are cheering, but what they don't realize is that a tariff is a hidden tax. And so what I would do is I would have free trade. One of the terms that I hate the most that politicians toss around is fair trade. And my question is, fair to whom? You know, if the buyer and the seller both agree to a price, then fine. That's fair to them. Why does somebody else, why does a third party have to step in and say that, you know, deem it fair? So, and as far as relations with the world, there's a famous quote about when goods cross borders, soldiers don't have to. So if we open up our trade, then we don't have to worry about that. In fact, I had something happen to me in the early 80s in which I had a Fiat Spider at the time, and I had, you know, parked in a parking lot, and this older gentleman came over and just was pretty much scowling at me, and I couldn't figure out what I'd done wrong. And he looked at my car and he said that he was a World War II veteran, and how dare I drive an Italian car. Now, you know, I really appreciate his service, and I didn't want to, you know, debate him too much. But what I would have said was, look, if we're buying cars from Italy, they're not going to bomb us. You know, we had a threat from Japan. Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. Well, they're not going to bomb us now since we buy so many Toyotas and Hondas.
Yeah, but all right. So on sort of a lighter note, you've really taken into sort of the meme culture with, you know, embracing, you are the JoJo of the election race. Have you actually seen JoJo's Bizarre Adventure?
No, JoJo of what?
Oh, you've been using the memes with JoJo's Bizarre Adventure.
Oh, okay, okay. I've got a great social media staff who I have given a lot of leeway to, and they will consult with me every now and then to make sure they're on message, but that's, I leave it in their capable hands. But every now and then they do send me something, some of the memes going around out there.
Okay, so a little bit of backstory between, you know, I know you tweeted that thing where it's like you're going on a bizarre adventure. So JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is
Yeah.
a very influential anime and manga series that's made in Japan. That's been ongoing since '87 through sort of different incarnations.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, well, yeah, what I was going to say is our social media has just been so successful and has brought in so many people that we're just beyond ecstatic over where it's gotten us.
Well, it's done better than, I know there's been other libertarian people that are sort of claiming sort of JoJo thing. Unfortunately, like you when I did, like, I did a background check on you were, you know, clean. You had no sort of shady history. Unfortunately, the other person that claims to be libertarian, not so much. Who's also on podcasts.
Who would that be?
McAfee.
Oh, I don't even think he's. I mean, I don't even think he's ever been nominated. Or
No, he ran against Gary Johnson last year, or last time.
Well, exactly. He wasn't nominated. So anybody can run. We had 125 people. The last I checked was probably over that. 125 people as of last summer who had filed with the FEC saying they wanted to run for president. So anybody can fill out their name, even like, for instance, David Duke, who was the white supremacist. Even he filled out, not for the Libertarian Party, I believe that was either for the Democrats or Republicans. Even he ran for office.
Yeah, he ran for the Republicans, and the only reason is because, like, the area that he was running in was like, I think there was like a total of 20 people in his constituents.
Yeah. So the point is you can't look at George Bush or Donald Trump or, you know, Ronald Reagan and say, well, but look at David Duke, because, you know, they didn't have anything to do with it.
Yeah, there's there's white supremacists on both sides. So I'll admit that,
Oh yeah,
as,
and I mean, I've been hearing how well, the only elected official in the whatever U.S. or state or Senate was a Democrat, Senator Byrd, I believe, who was a Democrat. So, yeah, you can't judge the entire party by one person who wants to run for office.
yeah. So as
That you have no control over. I mean, the Republicans had no control over David Duke running, and the Libertarian Party has no control over McAfee running. Although, now I have heard, and let me speak in defense of McAfee for just a minute. Some people have said that some of these latest charges are trumped up. So, powerful guy.
I know for the sake, because I have actually listened to the podcast that he was on, where, he said, yeah, it was, corrupt government. It's a matter of, all right, he's dealing with a corrupt government on one side, but he did admit that he was trying to have his own drug cartel and beliefs with a 17-year-old. It was like, all right, we could have a little bit of disagreement here.
Yeah, well, I would like to point out that that I was the nominee, and he didn't even make it in the top 15 candidates. So he really didn't. The Libertarian Party clearly rejected his message. He wasn't even. I was never even in a debate with him. I was going to, from January until April, well, really through May, I was often visiting 2 or 3 states until the virus shut us down, and then we were doing it online for a while, but I wasn't in a single debate with him.
All right. A slightly serious, question. As someone actually has come from this, so. On a personal matter, I used to be a Facebook content moderator for the UK and Irish market, and I know it is an ongoing issue here, both internationally over in America. On pretty much it's an American company. It's on American soil. They pay American taxes. But it is a job that most people have gotten either PTSD or their politics have gone completely off the wall because they have to read so many conspiracy theories and all this type of thing. And neither Democrats or Republicans have really kind of supported us on this situation. What's the libertarian sort of opinion on, trying to, helping people? Because, people are getting, PTSD as a result of working a job where you're dealing with, people's heads being cut off and child porn.
So, I'm sorry, they're getting PTSD from which jobs now?
Content moderators for Facebook.
Oh, well, I guess this is something that's actually new to me, and I hadn't heard of that. So I guess I'm wondering what's Facebook doing? What the people who hire Facebook, what are they doing?
No, they're basically, they put us on a contract, and if our quality drops underneath 98%, we're let go. with no support, no backing, no anything.
Yeah, well, this is where we're hoping, and Facebook has been very biased, and Facebook, we're hoping that we are going to see some competition, because that's really how we've gotten places. If you look back 100 years ago, when people were working in cold factories without heat and that kind of stuff, through competition, you could lure the good employees by offering them better benefits, better working conditions, and so on. And there are some libertarians who are trying to come up with an alternative to Facebook. And so, but this is really not something that the government should get involved in. If there is a problem with Facebook fulfilling, mistreating its employees, then somebody needs to take them to court, of course. But the federal government shouldn't come in and just get in the middle between two different people or two different entities, whether it's people or companies or whatever, and tell them how they shouldn't conduct their business.
Yeah, like I know, like from my experience, like one of my first days on the job was I had to see someone being beaten to death with a plank of wood with nails in it and then repeatedly stabbed.
Oh my gosh. And so that was to make sure it didn't stay on Facebook?
Yeah. And the first time that I had to actually argue my point to actually taking down the content because there wasn't gore in the video.
Wow. Yeah. It sounds like Facebook needs to do a better job of screening who's watching it. For instance, perhaps former police officers wouldn't be as affected as an average civilian off the street because.
Oh, I'm just I work IT. I have IT qualifications.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. It sounds like Facebook needs to be, looking for people with different qualifications, because there's a difference between the technology, the underlying technology, and what you're actually seeing. So those are two, it's like there's a big difference between somebody who drives a bus and somebody who works on the engine. Big difference between a pilot and somebody who actually is an airline mechanic. So it sounds like they've got the airline mechanic in the pilot seat, and it sounds like they should, but the government's not going to go to Facebook and say, okay, you need to come up with a better way to hire people. Again, if they're abusing something, then they need to be taken to court.
Yeah. Well, no, the fact is that most of them are getting just above minimum wage.
Wow.
Even doing night work.
Wow. Yeah, I hadn't heard of that. I would definitely look into that. Again, I'm not saying that there needs to be a law passed, but that sounds like something I need to learn about.
Sort of to end it on sort of a lighter note.
Please, please.
So the last libertarian candidate, when he gave a speech it was like in 2006. He gave a speech that was essentially the same speech from Pokemon 2000. When it comes to games, as far as censorship and all this type of thing, anime fans or anime and gaming fans are always sort of concerned about censorship, whether one way or another.
Yeah.
What's your opinion towards anime fans and gamers and all this type of thing?
Well, that's not my world. However, you were mentioning censorship, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. In general, I'm against censorship. And here's what's ironic. I wish I could remember exactly the newspaper I was reading and the year it was, but it was a local newspaper, a few decades ago, back when people used to get newspapers delivered to their houses. And there was some local committee that was censoring books, like censoring community standards, what the people should be able to see and not see. So this was before the internet. And it showed a group of like 3 or 4 white men sitting around looking at this stuff. And again, it's back to Animal Farm. My thinking was, okay, So you get to see it, and you get to decide if somebody else gets to see it. How is that fair? Why do you get to see it and not anybody else? So again, we're adults. We can decide what we want to see and what we don't want to see. Now, well, and let me mention, as far as you talked about games, gaming. Again, I'm not as familiar with the gaming, but I do remember. I don't know if you've heard about this, but Tipper Gore, who was Al Gore's wife,
Yep.
right, and